But if you just try to push and sell stuff, now is not the time to do that at all.
So as we have more people who may have missed your bio, so I appreciate that. I guess I'll kind of follow up on that question just a little bit, and that is, you know, I'm almost to the point of speaking of I agree we need to over communicate. I'm getting cranky because I'm seeing all these emails titled COVID-19, you know, this and that. And so to Anessa's point about not just about prospecting, but just in general, kind of, I'm looking forward to hearing about things to kind of cut above the noise that are different and not annoying to the point of, you know, COVID-19 is so overused now. So I'm sure you're probably hearing that too.
Sure, and this is not news to any of you, but there are very clear stipulations of what constitutes a spam email and what does not. Now, I'm sure you all know about that, so you don't send out spam, but it's worth mentioning simply because those same rules about the subject line has to clearly identify what is in the email, that's very useful right now. So you do want to give people some suggestions within that subject line of what they're about to look at. But you're right, you shouldn't put COVID-19 update right away in there. And you also should probably flag for people if it's a resource or what it is so they don't feel as though there's been a bait and switch if they open that email. To that end, you probably want to broaden your lens of what you're offering. I'll give you an example actually from my industry. I do not own a video software platform company. That's not my business. I help people speak well in a bunch of different situations and formats. However, because of all those worlds that I work in, from professional sports to academia to finance to legal, I'm exposed to lots of different video software. So we sent around an email to our community, just simply giving our 2 cents on which software we found the most effective and useful and in what times. We're not going to make a lick of money from that. We're not going to actually, it's not going to help us in any way necessarily, but because of all the process work that we have done about that, it's potentially valuable to our clients. And we want to name that very clearly in the subject line. So I use that as an example to make the point, yes, there is such a thing right now as too much email regarding COVID-19, for sure. I mean, every company in the world is putting out our policy during COVID-19, our policy for shelter in place. So you do have to be mindful of not sort of overusing that. So make the subject line very specific and also make sure that the email has the potential to really be a resource and useful to people, not just an annoyance.
Absolutely. Do you think the ambiance and the entourage at home would make a difference in like communicating to like prospecting or like to your clients or to your past clients? Do you think that ambiance is an issue?
Yeah, sure. Do you mean how the video conference looks, of the background you have?
Yeah, or even the way like you work from home. Like some people don't have an actual office. So what would be the perfect actually ambiance to just be focused on like actually communicating well? And does this ambiance affect the way that you communicate in general?
So let me ask you one more clarifying question. Do you mean of how it looks on the screen when you're communicating, or do you also mean just your ability to concentrate based on where you've set yourself up?
The second one, the ability to concentrate.
Sure, yeah. So a couple ideas here, folks. One is that we all know, well, raise your hand around the world. We'll make this interactive. Please raise your hand if you have heard in the last, 3 to 7 years, that sitting all day long is bad for you.
You may have cut out that what's bad for you?
That sitting all day long is bad for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Now, it's very tempting though, when you're working from home to just dump yourself into a chair, put your computer on your lap, and then work for hours and hours at a time. So you can think about a couple simple rules to help with this, and they're all ups. It's 3 ups. It's warm up, stand up, and look up. Now, why do you want to warm up? Well, you're about to talk into a camera or a phone all day long. First of all, how you sound is going to matter in those interactions, but believe it or not, it's actually harder on your voice. So when people are remote communicating all day long, they're actually more likely to lose their voice or go hoarse. So you want to warm up at the beginning of the day. If you don't have a physical or vocal warm up, never fear, you can simply go to our website. We have a bunch of free ones there. You don't have to log in or anything. It's just open to the public. That's gktraining.com, and they're guided physical and vocal warm-ups. So that's the first thing. The second up is to stand up. Now, I don't mean all day long, but I mean regularly get up, and it's going to help your communication simply because of how our bodies are wired to speak. It's going to help your communication, but it's also going to get you out of your chair, get your metabolism working again, things like that. And the third up is to look up. And by look up, I mean actually looking right there at the camera. So to remind yourself to do that, I often have people put a Post-it note or a little marker right in the camera lens. I actually use a piece of foil, a gum wrapper, because it's shiny, gets my attention. So I actually just put that little gum wrapper right there near the camera, so it reminds me to look at the camera. Why is that useful for the ambiance question, Vanessa, that you were talking about? Well, it tends to bring your energy up and out of you as opposed to hunched down, typing, looking down all day long. Along with that, be mindful of the light that you have in the room. The light affects a lot, both how you look on camera, but also just how awake and alert you may be. I would encourage you to keep multiple kinds of writing devices next to you. So that means Post-it notes. It also means notepads of paper, of course, your computer, because writing things down in different ways actually stimulates your brains. It activates different pathways about how you order and digest and think about information. So it actually keeps you more awake and alert. And if you all as real estate professionals don't know how much place matters, then I don't know who I'm talking to. So make sure you put yourself in a room or some kind of space that you actually like, because you know more than almost anybody how much your space can dictate how you actually feel and speak and think. There's a lot more on that.
To be honest, I'm even more, I miss my office a lot. Like I miss going to the office. I miss actually interacting with our office staff and our agents. And I think I'm even more efficient while being at the office. So for me, it's important to have this perfect ambience. And I think I'm more efficient because at the office, it's this perfect placement. I have a big monitor that I can just have 2 screens. And, you know, this is like what actually makes me be more active and do more like better work. Or so, yeah.
I appreciate that. You know, let me reflect back a couple of ideas to you about this, Vanessa. One thing is, people, be mindful of your attire. Be mindful of what you put on in the morning. I don't mean that because it matters how you look on camera, which it does. I mostly mean that because if you know about the subject where you're talking about the semiotics of clothes or the semiotics of a wardrobe, how you dress actually affects how you use your body, believe it or not. And if you wear clothes that actually have you or force you into a more upright posture, it will actually change how you feel, and it will even change what comes out of your mouth, believe it or not, what you choose to say. So if you're a person that you know that how you dress actually impacts how you walk and talk and breathe and think, and most of us are that, by the way, be mindful of what you put on in the morning. Now, the other thing I would say about the Vanessa is that there's a lot of things that are worse when communicating remotely. No doubt about it. So a way to help you have some more like energy or vitality or even excitement in your day, try to find the things that are actually better remote. And I'll give you an example. Remote communication can be an amazing place to practice skills that you couldn't otherwise do in real life. And I'll give you an example. Many folks who are in the world of selling, prospecting, business development, you have to ask powerful questions. Now, you all know this. And of course, there's closing questions. Do you want to proceed? What else do you need to know about this property? What more can I do to help you have comfort with that final number? These sorts of questions. And at times, people really shy away from them and they feel a little tentative, or they tend to ask them faster and with more non-fluencies than they do in the rest of the conversation. A non-fluency simply being an an a repetition of language, things like that, stumbling over a word. Well, when you're remote, you actually can test these things and use it as a laboratory. So if you're a person who, you know this about yourself, you have a hard time tolerating silence after asking a powerful question. You want to self-answer, you want to give the person some options, you want to just keep moving past the question so there's no loaded silence. You can actually do activities when remote to help you build that skill. I'll give you an example. If you're on video, your audience can only see this boundary right here. So get in the practice of asking a question at the end of the question over here where people can't see. Put your hand down on your table or your desk or even your leg. And the idea there is that you're actually pressing a brake pedal in a car. You're going to place that down at the end of the question and you're not going to talk again until the person does. When the person starts talking, you can pick your hand up again. No one sees that. Now, if you're on, and I will now turn my video off for a second, if you are on the phone, even better. You can actually ask the question, and I'll show you what I'm going to do in a second. You can ask the question, and if you know this about yourself, you could actually, after the question's complete, bite down on your finger, or go like this for a second. Now, that sounds silly, but what you're doing is you're using kinesthetic training and embodied cognition to teach yourself to do that one very specific habit of asking a specific question and tolerating silence afterwards. And that's something you can't do in real life. So this one small thing is an example of how this barrier that we all have between us right now can actually be beneficial in terms of professional development.
That's huge. I didn't even know that, I mean, that's actually a thing. I've been doing this for years because there's power in silence. That's one thing my mentor taught me years ago. Just keep your mouth closed with that little half smile.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right.
That's great. By the way, I should break and say this is an open session for Michael. I know several of you just came in a few minutes ago. You can put your questions either in the chat box or just feel free to speak up and ask some questions of our guest. I just, while you were talking, I was looking at your website and all the resources there are fantastic, free resources, Facebook group. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that as well, and while people are kind of reviewing some questions that they might have. So yeah.
Well, I have here Donna that has sent me a private message. She said, "Hi, I have a response to the ambience. I have been trying to get a client on board with me since December. We spoke a few times and we talked about ambience. He's a businessman with many clients and business background. This is what he said to me. Donna, I don't care about your ambience. I want to know about you." Well, that said, I had to really set up and tell him about me, my background, so he could find a way to build a relationship, which is more important than anything for him. Just a story about the ambience from Donna. So in her case, her client mentioned that I don't care about the ambience, I care about you, your personality, your background.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's a point that's worth repeating. It's very easy to get hung up on all the stuff around you, how it looks, if there's interruptions, if the lighting is right. On the phone, same thing. But it's still the same activity of communicating. And people are going to be far more forgiving of everything behind you, of the light source, of all these other things about ambiance, of course. They're going to be far more forgiving if they actually feel as though they're connecting to you on a personal level. So although these are things that are important and useful, they're important and useful as much as anything to help you feel comfortable and bring your best self to the interaction. That is the key thing, not necessarily how the shot actually looks or does not. And by shot, I mean yourself on this video camera, or even the sound quality of the phone call necessarily. So now to your point, Bonnie, please do keep me abreast. And folks, you can, exactly as Bonnie said, you can feel free to type questions in the chat box, but you can also just, if you want to, unmute yourself and jump in and ask a question. I will get to your point, Bonnie, now a little bit, but folks, please keep the questions coming, and I'll tell you why. If you have a question, I bet you someone else does too. And the more we make this about what is on your mind, the more effective this entire time together can be. So Bonnie, to your point, oh yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would, well, I'm thinking about it. So I like the words articulating value. And, you know, it's interesting because in this current coronavirus situation, we actually have some opportunities in our industry to repeat and articulate the value, and maybe in different ways that we've done before. Some of our competitors with different business models are actually struggling. Some of the discount, quote, discount brokerages that they compete by offering discounts or rebates to their clients. I personally see this as a time to shine because those business models aren't working right now. So this is just a broad question, and anybody can expand on this because I have a lot of conversations with people on how to bring value to your clients. And that's a generic sense, because I know you aren't in our world specifically, but maybe there's some thoughts you have around that and what we were starting to get into with some of your resources that you have available.
Sure, sure. This does verge a little bit into questions, into persuasive conversations, but I'll highlight two things for you. One is that you can't do that if you don't have a sense of what the person you're talking to is interested in. So this goes back to like Sales 101, but you have to ask a bunch of questions. And they can't just be random questions. So you can think about a skill that I call question awareness and agility. Now, all that means is that you're mindful of the questions you're asking, and you have the agility to ask them in different ways. So to help make this kinesthetic for everybody, so you remember it for the rest of your life, let's do a little kinesthetic learning right now. I'm going to have you actually say question, awareness, and agility, but I want you to do it with me while we do some hand gestures. I'll show you first. So in a minute, we're going to draw a giant question mark. We're going to say question as we draw a big question mark. And then we're going to make our hands into an A, and we're going to say awareness while we move one hand, and agility while we move the other one. So the whole thing is like this: question, awareness, and agility. We'll do it all across cyberspace. Are you ready, everybody? 1, 2, 3. Question, awareness, and agility. Great. So you could be asking someone that very simple question of like, what is important to you in a property? You can ask that 5 different ways. Open-ended, what is important to you in a property? Closed-ended, is size of acreage important to you in a property? Multiple choice, what is the most important thing to you in a property? Size of acreage, the actual house, or the school district? Preamble means you talk about the subject quite a while before you get to the question to help the person have comfort with the topic. In thinking about what is most important to you, many different people have different responses. And if you think about the different things that are important, price, of course, the actual house itself, the acreage that it is on, the school district, of course, there are many different things. So in thinking about what's most important to you, what would you say those things are? So you've given them a lot of time to think about it. And then hypothetical, of course, which is if we could find the ideal property anywhere, what would all the important things be? Now, that's the same question, but it's asked 5 different ways. And your job as a good persuasive communicator is to figure out how to ask questions with awareness and agility so you can learn what's important to them. So that's the first part of it, when you ask questions. But now what about when they give you information? The simplest thing I can tell you folks is just tell stories. Tell stories of previous folks you've helped. Tell stories of nightmare scenarios and nightmare situations that you know about. Ask the person for stories that they know. Put all of the value you bring into the context of specific examples and specific stories because they're memorable, They make points tangible for people, and they persuade people much more than a whole bunch of explanatory details or data. So those are a couple things to keep in mind in terms of how you articulate value. Bonnie, do you have a follow-up to that based on what I just shared?
Not necessarily, but I think the gist of what you said is huge. It's all about them. And I think as brokers, anybody, we tend to go into presentation mode immediately, saying why we're so great and this and that. And we don't really take the time. I mean, not all. I mean, we're excited, right? We're excited about what we can bring, but maybe taking that pause and asking questions as in many different ways to understand what their needs are first. I think you could probably beat out about 95% of your competition on a listing presentation if you approach it that way, because I think, as you said, people will forgive a variety of different things about, you know, how you look that day or your background if they know you're interested in them. So, and the story thing, do you have any components on, I mean, it sounds weird, I'll try to phrase this differently, but components of storytelling, to where, is there any kind of suggestions for brief storytelling that doesn't get too involved on how you help somebody, for example?
Yeah, sure. So you can think of this structurally. There's two good models to keep in mind. One has 5 stages, one has 3 stages. They're both going to be familiar to you because they are omnipresent in every bit of storytelling ever. So the 5 is classical storytelling structure. And it looks actually like a little mountain. I'll do it in your perspective view here. The first stage is exposition. That means the background. Then there's rising action. That means all the stuff building up to. And then the third stage, of course, is the climax. So that's when the ship hits the iceberg or the Death Star explodes or whatever the thing is. Then you have falling action, and then you have denouement. Now that sounds more like a movie or classical storytelling. It works in real life too. Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, denouement. If you want to simplify that, you can actually think in 3 beats, 3 structure. Likeable hero encounters a roadblock and emerges transformed. Now that hero, though, can be anybody. It can be the person you're trying to help get a house. It could be a house itself. It could be your company. It could be you. I mean, Bonnie, you told me a story about what actually brought you into this industry in the first place in 2001. And I'm sure some of you might know that story. I won't share it for you, but you began actually our conversation by sharing a story. That does not need to be long-winded. I'll give you an example. The Mint Theater Company in New York City, they have a 4-word mission statement. Lost plays found here. Now, if you listen to those 4 words, they're all monosyllabic, by the way. They're single syllables. Lost plays found here. They give little-known plays their first American premiere. Now, if you look at those 4 words, that 3-beat structure is actually in those 4 words. There's a play. It never really got much attention. We put it on here, and now it's getting more attention. That's 3 beats. The likable hero is the play. The climax is we did a production of it here, and then emerging transformed is now the play has more exposure or more notoriety. If you look at political slogans, by the way, you will see this all over the place. And I'm not going to take this call into a political direction. I will leave that to you to extrapolate in your own minds. But if you look at political slogans, political mantras, I promise you, the good ones tell a story. So those are some things to keep in mind about how to structure brief stories. I'll share one other thought with you, and this is to your point about asking questions. I'll give you a very specific example of a story. I one time worked with an organization called the Green Sports Alliance, and what they did was help sports leagues and teams to make their entire operations more sustainable. And if someone asked them what do they do, especially in a sales kind of situation, they would do the exact thing you're talking about before, Bonnie, which is they would launch into Well, we seek to take advantage and benefit from all of the different aspects of sports and the multicultural aspects of it, and also realize more value along the supply chain for all of our different vendors. Okay, so a big information dump. And what we said to them is say, hey, look, you're in a really great position, which is you're talking about sports. So just ask people questions to start. Do you like sports? Oh yeah, I do. Oh, do you have a favorite sport? Football. Really? Have you favorite team? Yeah, the Patriots actually. Make a joke if you want to. Oh, too bad. But anyway, have you been to a game at Foxborough? Yeah. Well, we help Foxborough put more healthy hot dogs in their vending stands and less trash in their trash cans. What do you do? So the entire elevator pitch is that one single sentence: healthier hot dogs and less trash. And it's all based on a conversation as opposed to pushing a whole bunch of information.
Michael, do you think the same structure will apply to a presentation? Like, we are so many agents here. Would the same structure apply to a presentation of an agent or of an introduction to an agent? Like, let's say we're introducing ourselves to a new potential client. Would the same structure work?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It may be a more formal kind of a situation. I'll give you a couple thoughts on this. Folks, do yourselves a favor. If you're going to use visuals or create a deck, slideshow, something like this, do yourselves a favor, grab a stack of Post-it notes. Don't just open up an old deck and rearrange. Don't write all your thoughts in to a single deck so you have a bunch of text there. Grab a stack of Post-it notes and then do a brain dump of all the important stuff that you want to cover in this presentation. Write on those Post-it notes one idea per Post-it, not 19, not a whole bullet list, one idea per Post-it, and put those Post-it notes out on your desk. Then look at those Post-it notes and actually put those Post-it notes in order based on how the ideas make the most sense to you. And then now you're looking actually at the slide deck of what you're going to show to the people. Then you can look at those slides and say which one is an image, which one might be a provocative question, which one can afford to have some text. So you're building it. Now to your question though, Vanessa, that whole process actually will unlock storytelling, because you're then going to be taking people through a deck in a way that intuitively makes sense as a story. Importantly, folks, the very beginning of that presentation should absolutely be questions to the audience. It should absolutely be questions to them. And that can even be a confirming question, which basically just gets their permission. I want to walk you through some of the things that you may already know, but also some new information about our firm. I thought we could start right here, but I want to make sure I'm being responsive to your needs. How does that sound as a starting point? Now, they're probably going to say, yeah, sounds great, but at least you've already gotten that conversation going, and you've begun by giving a question as opposed to launching into everything that you want to share in this particular presentation. So those are some things to keep in mind when you apply it to a more formal kind of presentation situation.
So Michael, I'm just starting to read this book called Personal Kanban, which was recommended to me after going to a client's house and seeing Post-it notes everywhere. Is that from that book, or do you have any recommended reading?
No, it's not. I mean, one of the things you have to think about when you're looking at different tools is that how you process information actually becomes deeply impacted by what you're doing physically. So part of the reason Post-it notes are so great is because you have to actually write them, but then you can move them. But I like to use lots of other tools as well. For instance, I mentioned this gum wrapper earlier on the camera there. But if you simply do a very physical activity of trying to reduce everything you say in an elevator pitch to as brief a components as you possibly can, and you take a gum wrapper and you share one idea at a time, and at the end of each idea, you have to fold the gum wrapper in half. Now you share the next idea, fold it again. Next idea, fold it again. And if you can't get your full value proposition out before you have folded this until it can't be folded anymore, your value proposition is too long. So in other words, that might look like blah, 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 fold. Blah, 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 fold, blah, 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 fold, blah, 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 blah. And if you can't reduce what you're saying to that, it means it's too lengthy. Now, that's a very physical way to play with language. That's the post-its are like anything that gets you physically and kinesthetically involved in what's coming out of your mouth will help you do so in a much more evocative and much more evocative way, in a way that connects with your audience much more easily.
Hey, Michael?
Yeah.
Did you go back to the three-step story? I didn't get those.
Sure, yeah. The three-step story is, this is from classical storytelling too, the likable hero who encounters a roadblock and then who emerges transformed.
Okay.
Now, if you think of any famous movie, you could probably put those things in place. But the hero does not need to be a character that is a warrior or a person. The character could be a company. The character could be a house. The character could be a committee. The character could be really anything, an inanimate object. It doesn't much matter. All you have to have is a figure that is going through something. And if you want to test this, just use your fingers. So you have 5 stages in classical storytelling structure. So you just test and see exposition, blah, 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 rising action, climax, falling action, denouement. So I might test it and say, I once was brought in to talk to some folks about real estate via video. We had a great discussion via video, and we talked about a lot of the challenges they face. And at the end, we realized that selling real estate is not only an essential thing right now, but it's a great way to connect to a broader community. So everyone from that meeting decided they should go out and actually do a few more phone calls. And we've put a next steps, action step thing in place to make sure that they do it. I mean, I'm just making up this story right now about this video conference, as you could probably tell. But you also could do it this way. You could do it in just 3 stages. My team wanted to make sure that we such and such. What we did was we accomplished la, 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 and now we're able to blah, 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 blah. So you can actually test and see if you know what the heck this story is by using your hands to help keep you accountable, really, to throw down a gauntlet to make sure your storytelling is as brief and as structured as possible.
That's good, thanks.
Yeah.
You mentioned teams, Michael. Now, you know, a lot of this is focused around communicating to your sphere. A lot of our brokers, they work on teams or they'll have listings together. Are there any strategies, I mean, from your experience and the things that you've done with the campaigns and things, are there any thoughts you have on how to better communicate with your team?
Sure. Let me clarify that one as well. So you mean when team presenting, like there's multiple folks trying to talk to a client and how to do that in a skillful way? Or do you mean when you are trying to communicate to your team directly to coordinate or plan or things like that?
Well, I was thinking of the second thing you mentioned. However, the first question is actually a really a good thing to also discuss, because sometimes we do present as teams. So yeah, if you could talk about both of those, that'd be great.
All right, well, let's start with the first. Now, folks, if you have follow-up questions to these, because I'm getting pretty detailed in some of these answers, please feel absolutely free to type in follow-up questions into the chat box, or just as Greg did a second ago, feel free to unmute yourself and talk a little bit. So when team presenting, the single biggest place I can help you put your focus is on what I call baton handoffs. Now, if any of you have ever watched a track and field race, a relay of any kind, a 4x100, a 4x400, whatever it might be, everyone knows that those races are won or lost in the baton handoffs. It's not the team with the fastest sprinters necessarily. It's a team with the most fluid and efficient handoffs. The same thing is true in team presenting. The biggest area that things fall down is people don't hand things off in a skilled and fluid way between each other. And so what happens is you end up doing a whole big song and dance, and you're doing great, and you say, okay, now Bonnie, do you want to see that? Now all of the energy of the interaction collapses. So it is your job, a la a great stand-up comic who is setting up the next act for success, to bring that same energy and precision into your introduction or handoff to the other person. And there's no such thing as making that too explicit. Now, to go along with that, you don't want to throw your buddy under the bus. And so what this means is, I call this delegate and introduce, is you have to say the person's name 2 times, not just 1, 2 times. So if I'm going to throw you under the bus, Bonnie, what that sounds like is, hey, it's a great question about how the coronavirus pandemic is going to impact real estate prices. And Bonnie? So Bonnie also says, thanks, Michael. Yeah, right. So you have to say Bonnie's name twice. It's a fascinating question about the impact of real estate prices in the coronavirus pandemic age. I know that Bonnie has done a lot of research about what that looks like, not just locally, but also nationally. So in a second, I'm going to introduce her to share a couple thoughts about that. But the one thing I want to share is that, you say something, whatever the thing is that you want to share about it, and then you hand up, Bonnie, what would you add to that? Now, I'm painting that in pretty, doing a pretty thick job of really laying that on for you, because I want you to see the example. You may not need to go into that much detail, but it's important you mention the person's name 2 times so they can get ready and prepared. So that's one bit of information about team presenting. But let's talk about communicating to your team. I'm going to frame this in the context of remote communication, because that's what we all have right now. And we're on the phone or we're on video. And the simple idea here is that when you're remote and trying to communicate with the team, it's incumbent on you to do an even better job of bookending what you're going to say. So everyone knows if you have a half an hour meeting, the first minute or 2, you should establish an agenda. Everybody knows that. And everyone also knows the last 2 minutes or so, you should establish and confirm next steps. Everybody knows that. But what not everyone knows is that when you're remote, you can actually do the same thing within miniature comments you make within the call. So that might sound like, I want to jump in here because what you brought up affects 2 questions that we're talking about for next week's meeting. I want to mention those 2, and then I'd love to get the group's temperature on if we're missing anything. So you've actually teed up what you're about to talk about. And then at the end of that little, let's say 90 seconds or 2 minutes of speaking, you want to hand it back off with as much specificity again at that second bookend. So you're not just saying like, what do we think about that? Because if I say to all of you, all 39 participants right now, what do you all think about that? Everyone's head explodes. Like, what do you mean, Michael? Like, should I unmute myself now, or do we all just talk? Or, you know what, I'm going to do my text messages. That's the process. So at that bookend, instead, what you have to say is, I would love to get the group's response, either via chat or we'll take 3 people commenting now. What are we missing from what I just laid out? So people have a very clear expectation of what's coming next. And there really is no such thing as being too explicit or too clear about those things when remote, because as we talked about earlier, there are some barriers and some difficulties to being in this interface as opposed to in person.
So, Michael, I just want to expand on the first thing that you said, because it was just so great that you thought about that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, for all of those questions that I get from people are, here's a couple of examples. Hey, I'm going to be leaving on vacation, and so-and-so is going to help handle my business for me. You know, I need to hand it off to them. Okay, so that's one scenario. Another scenario is, you know, maybe somebody is part of a team. You have a listing agent, you have a buyer's agent. So many, and I'm sure all of you have seen this experience with particular brokerages. Like, if you're working with a cooperating agent and they have a team, and you end up having to repeat the same information to 4 different team members because nobody's talking. But how not to throw your team member under the bus, or how to bring in a team member when you're going on vacation or when you're planning a retirement or whatnot. Bringing that team member in on presentations, in this case, virtual presentations, are going to be hugely helpful so that that client feels like they're taken care of and you're not just leaving them with this agent that all of a sudden they don't know or haven't built rapport with. So bringing them on as a crucial team member and not just someone that's going to be covering, I think is going to be helpful. So Michael's comments about how to bring them in, I think are really relevant, and we'll expand upon that more. So I just wanted to drive that point home, and then I'll let other people talk now.
Sure. Do you want me to comment a bit on what you just said and reflect some of that back? Or, as you just mentioned, does anyone have a follow-up question to that or something they would like to chime in on? All right, let me share a couple thoughts. If this triggers other questions for folks, just let me know. There's a lot to what you just said, meaning there's some management challenges within there. There's some time management challenges within there. There's some communication challenges within there. It's a big topic. So not to bite off more than we can chew, but you really do have to look at a bunch of things, meaning who is the person in the role? Are they the right person for it? Have you been clear with their instructions and expectations? Is this a stretch role? Can they actually handle this or not? That all goes into the decision-making process before we even get to the communication aspect of it. But then jumping forward, let's say those things are in place, then it does mean more work for you. But there again, it's no such thing as going too far with being as explicit as you can about your expectations. That might even mean a couple of examples of templated emails of how this client likes to respond. Very clear information about how this client likes to communicate. Is it actually better via text message or email or voicemails? These devices have given us a lot of freedom. They've also made our lives quite busy, and people prefer to communicate in different ways. Similarly, when you tee that person up, you want to tee them up for as much success as you possibly can. So if you say to a client, Bonnie's going to fill in for me while I'm on vacation, and she'll keep me updated. So yeah, so I'll see you soon. Now, of course, that client's going to think like, who's Bonnie? And why are you going on vacation right now? I'm closing a house, for gosh sakes. So it's important that you make Bonnie be teed up as the best possible resource in this particular situation. And that you also ensure that you are a backstop to whatever that might be. So Bonnie is going to help out in this team. You could even leave vacation out if you want to. Bonnie is going to also be brought on board with the team. And the reason I'm so excited about that is that Bonnie brings a real expertise, in particular to financing options for such and such. So I'm going to actually put her in lead on this for you in the time being. And I'm also going to be available, of course, but I want to bring her in. So Bonnie is going to join us for a conference call, and you move right forward with actually making the introduction. You don't even necessarily at that point put it up to a question of some kind. But what this assumes, folks, is that Bonnie is a good choice to do that. And we are talking about client relationship management. So the first order of business is making sure that the team you have around you for this situation, that they're going to be the best possible resource to do what you're trying to do.
So Michael, I would love to, this is skipping around a little bit, but I would love to hear two questions, not super related, but in terms of how you are doing business in light of the current situation, are there any kind of aha moments for you or things that you've changed specifically? I know at the start of the meeting you talked about, like, certain things you've embraced or certain things you've not. And then the second, I guess, question, again, not related, is necessarily, why you do what you do, how you got into it, and do you have any stories in terms of not necessarily real estate? I know you're making this all about us, but we also have a lot to learn about you from being in a different industry. So, I shared at the, before the meeting officially started, I shared my kind of thing that caused me to get into what I'm doing now. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, sure. I'll do those step by step. The biggest thing that has changed is that we've taken all GK Training, the company I founded. We teach communication. We teach speaking, writing, selling, and leading. And we have taken all that curriculum and we've now put it online, because obviously we don't know how long we're all going to be separated. So as an example, We have a 14 lesson course specifically on communicating remotely that can be done anywhere in the world, anytime, by anyone, at any pace or speed that they like. So that has probably been the single biggest change in my business that you asked about, is that everything has shifted to be online learning or like this, via webinar or remote. I feel very fortunate, and I feel a tremendous amount of empathy for how challenging the economy is right now. I feel fortunate in that we're actually quite busy because lots and lots of people are trying to learn how to be better as communicators when remote. But I am very cognizant. I mean, we're based in New York City. I'm very, very cognizant of what a brutal time it is economically for many, many businesses, and who knows where this leads. So that's a bit of an answer about your question about my particular business. Then in terms of the background of what brought me here, I actually come to communication training from a performance background. I got my master's in fine arts as an actor. I worked in Broadway, film, and TV for about 5 years. I did my MFA at NYU in New York. And I started this company in 2009. And then in 2014, I shifted into academia, started teaching at Columbia. 2016, I got pulled into my first presidential campaign. And then, of course, as you mentioned before, 2020, I was working closely with the Andrew Yang campaign. So that's a bit of the journey. But the third part I will say about that journey, which gets into some stories that you asked about, is that what has allowed that journey over the last 10 years is a curriculum that I have developed that is about kinesthetic learning and about sensory learning. And I will share an example story with you right now that I hope is meaningful to everybody who's listening. People tend to have habits that shoot them in the foot as communicators. Maybe it's the one I referenced earlier, when you ask a question, but you're not comfortable with the silence, so you just keep on talking and just step right over that question. Perhaps it's that you get a bunch of filler language or ums or uhs when you get into more challenging topics. Maybe you're not as comfortable with eye contact as you might be. Maybe you tend to speak in a monotone when you're in professional situations. Now, all of these things tend to be sticking points for people, and the strange thing is the more that they try to change them, oftentimes the worse they get. And I'll tell you why. Because they're trying to change them using ineffective tools. One of the biggest ones is called thought suppression. And the second part is it's a mental adjustment for what's a physical activity. So what the heck do I mean by thought suppression? Thought suppression is basically this. Everybody, everyone in the world, everyone who's listening, don't think, do not think about a pink elephant. Okay, so you're obligated to think about a pink elephant. That's thought suppression. You're telling yourself not to do something, but by the very activity of focusing on that not, you obligate your brain to think about it more. So for example, people will say like, don't say don't say don't say stop saying don't say, oh, you're saying again, stop saying stop saying Well, you're just making the bigger. So the first thing is thought suppression doesn't work. So if you have a tendency that you know that does not help you, give up the whole thought suppression game. The second part is that you're often making a mental adjustment for what is a physical activity. And I'll give you the example again. Let's say you don't want the thought suppression. Let's say it's positive language. Hey, just remember to pause after you ask questions. You tell yourself that, right? That's the memo, the mental adjustment you give yourself. I promise you, you go into the meeting, you're going to go right back on the autopilot and right into the same habit. So a mental adjustment for a physical activity, which communicating is ultimately a physical activity. The physical adjustment would be practice doing physical kinesthetic activities that force a different behavior. And the fold in the gum wrapper was one I mentioned before, but you could do all manner of things. You can actually draw a question mark at the end of questions to force yourself to be silent. You do that on phone calls, no one can see it. Pretty soon, you've actually built a muscle memory pattern of doing that. So it's quite a few things to cover in one question, but that's a bit of how my business has changed, a bit about how I got into this business and this world in the first place, and then some example stories of how you can use kinesthetic learning to build more positive habits. Now,
Fantastic.
I recognize, let me jump in here, actually, I'll jump right back in. I recognize we're coming up against the top of the hour pretty shortly. So I want to make sure that we handle any remaining questions that folks have. But I also want to, Bonnie and Inessa, if we've missed anything that you want to touch on, let's do that for sure.
I actually just wanted to speak on, because it's we have just 8 minutes left. I wanted to introduce everybody to your online training program that it's available for us. I'm gonna send an email to everybody with the online training program that I can just share a quick PDF with you guys just to present it to you and show you what it's about. So it's provided by GK Training, and we have a remote communication overview here about, like, the first 2 lessons are free for you to just watch as a demo, and totally just I'll send you guys the link about with more information about it as well. So I want us to stay connected for sure. I think this is a new strategy for us to do, you know, meetings, and you know, it's a nova for our agents to maybe jump in and ask questions directly, because we're not very comfortable with the video type of format yet. But I want us to stay connected, so I'm gonna also send some links with GK Training Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, so we can watch more videos and learn something more from you and your company, Michael.
Sure. Sure. Let me add to that a couple of thoughts. One, folks, if you have other questions, the simplest thing by far, just follow me on Twitter. I'm relatively new to it because politically I had to stay out of those waters given the different clients I have. But the reason it's very useful right now is, since we're not in person, if you have a question, you can just ask me on Twitter. It's really easy and it's totally free, and I'm very responsive with that. So the Twitter handle is simple. Let me see if I can type it in right here. You can take a look at it. It's, there we go. It's just my first 2 initials and my last name. So that's one simple way. If you have further questions we've not gotten to today, because you might, you can just follow me there and ask me questions. In terms of the online learning, what we've done as much as possible is we've tried to price all the offerings we have about remote communications as low as possible, because we recognize the situation that folks are in terms of this economy. And I mention that not just because it's a useful tool for people, but also to come right back to the very first question we talked about today in terms of reaching out to people. To the extent that you all can make your offering or your help to people as easy and as manageable as possible, I urge you to do so right now, because it's a strange and challenging and difficult time. So, Inessa, you can share the links about that, but just so you know, folks who are joining the call, we're giving a very, very discounted rate for that if you do want to actually spend time in a 14-course lesson improving as a remote communicator. So you can look forward to that. And besides that, if you don't want to actually do that program, you can also just go to our website. We have a ton of free resources, free webinars, a physical and vocal warm-up that you can use and do every day, videos on our YouTube channel. It's a ton of free resources just to try to think of this as a first exposure to how you communicate, but to get much, much better as quickly as you can in a remote situation, because this can be challenging, let's face it. So I'll put that URL in here too, but Inessa is going to send that around as well so people have that.
I will make sure that I'll add all of the details about the training, the costs, and all of the links to everybody individually. Yeah, I think this is a challenging time for experienced agents and for brand new agents, because for brand new agents, they don't know what to compare it with, because they're brand new in this business and they don't know what's going on. How do I communicate with my clients that I've been just trying to, you know, like get them, you know, and transfer them into like listings and buyers and stuff, convert them. And now, you know, it's like such crisis that, you know, like I hope that this communication program is going to be very good for them. So if I'm going to make sure that to send the links to everybody.
Well, you know, I'll share one final tiny story on that topic. I started this company in 2009. Let me tell you, as someone who did that, 2009 was not such a good time to start a business. Maybe many of you remember this. Now, I don't say that in any way to say like, ooh, good job, look at me. Not at all. All I'm suggesting is that if you can begin to build some business, and if you can actually wade into these waters and navigate these really tumultuous times, I promise there's great benefit on the other side of it. And, you know, Bonnie and I started talking at the very beginning of this call that one of the things she likes the very most about the culture of where she works is that it's a bunch of lifelong learners. And I just want to reinforce that, because what these times call on for all of us is, to a degree, some reinvention, and to continue to learn and to continue to be open and continue to be agile. And I promise you, no matter what you're going through, which it can be awful given the circumstances, there's someone else who's going through things that are awful too, whoever that is. And oftentimes it's the clients you may be speaking to. So to the extent that you can, even in these very difficult times, find ways to focus on your communication, to be of service to the other person that you're talking to, even if it's just a remote meeting or phone call. It will help all of us navigate through this really unprecedented time with as much grace and as much ease as we can.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Wow, that is just so well said. A lot of great businesses are born in the hardest of times, from the Depression to the housing meltdown to September 11th. I mean, we all will come through this stronger. And so I love hearing that story. And as just one closing thought too, Michael, we'll look at ways also of engaging with you and your team on a corporate level. So I will explore that further, talk with Anessa, follow up. And for all of you listening, Anessa and I will send out resources from this call for you. And then also just a lot of private messages I've been getting that you've really enjoyed the content. So thank you, Michael, for that. And I look forward to more of your feedback on how we can, continue with these great topics. So